Oops, I did it again. 3 words, a pink heart, and a photograph that made the announcement impossible to misunderstand. On August 20th, Kimberly Stewart turned 47. But instead of simply posting a birthday picture, Rod Stewart's daughter revealed something her followers clearly hadn't been expecting. She is pregnant again. Another daughter is on the way. And normally, that would be where the celebrity headline begins and ends. A famous musician's daughter is having another baby. Congratulations, a few family photographs, perhaps a grandfather joke somewhere down the line. Except the timing makes this one difficult to treat as ordinary, because only days earlier, the conversation around the Stewart family had sounded very different. Rod had undergone a coronary stent procedure. Shows disappeared from his schedule. Doctors told him to take several weeks away from performing. Fans who had spent decades assuming he would simply keep turning up suddenly had a reason to check every update a little more carefully. Then Kimberly posts a photograph and writes, almost mischievously, "Oops, I did it again." I think that contrast is the interesting part, not because one piece of good family news somehow cancels a medical scare. It doesn't. And there is no public statement suggesting Rod experienced some dramatic reaction when Kimberly told him. But families have strange timing. One week, everyone is discussing hospitals, recovery, and cancelled plans. Then somebody says there is another child coming. The emotional temperature of the room changes, and in Rod Stewart's family that change is bigger than it first appears. Kimberly's baby will become his 7th grandchild. Just weeks ago, that number was 5. Earlier this month, Rod's daughter Ruby welcomed her 2nd son, Levi. Now Kimberly has revealed that she is expecting her 3rd child. So while Rod has temporarily been forced to step away from one part of his life, another part is expanding almost ridiculously fast. That detail, I wouldn't dismiss it. For most of Rod Stewart's public life, numbers meant records sold, concerts played, chart positions, tours. Now there are other numbers. 8 children, soon 7 grandchildren. Children born across radically different chapters of his life are now creating families of their own. And Kimberly occupies a particularly interesting place in that story. She is not one of Rod's younger children from the settled years with Penny Lancaster. Kimberly was born in 1979, when Rod's life looked completely different. Her mother is Alana Stewart. She grew up while her father was still very much the international rock star, whose private life regularly became public entertainment. Now she is 47, already the mother of Delilah and a young son, and starting again with another daughter. There is something almost funny about the phrase she chose. "Oops, I did it again." Light, casual, very Kimberly. But look at the family around that sentence, and it becomes something else. Rod became a father for the first time when he was still a teenager. His youngest son arrived when Rod was already in his 60s. His family stretches across generations in a way few families do, and now those generations are beginning to overlap. The grandfather recovering from a heart procedure, the daughter celebrating her 47th birthday, a grandson who has only just turned 1, another grandson born this month, and somewhere ahead, another granddaughter. The headline says unexpected family news, but perhaps the surprise is not simply that Kimberly is pregnant. It is what this particular announcement quietly reminds everyone of. While one generation is being told to slow down, the next one keeps arriving. There is one detail about Rod Stewart's family that sounds almost like a mistake when you first hear it. His children span more than 40 years. That means Dad has never referred to one fixed version of Rod Stewart. Kimberly knew one. His youngest boys know another. And the man now waiting for his 7th grandchild is different again. That matters here because Kimberly's pregnancy is not simply another addition to an already enormous family. It arrives at a moment when Rod's place inside that family appears to be changing. For most of his life, he was the one creating the movement. Another relationship, another child, another marriage, another house, another tour. Now his children are creating the movement around him. They marry, they become parents, they bring babies into rooms where Rod is no longer the father making every decision. He is Grandpa. That may sound obvious, but I think celebrity coverage often misses what that role reversal actually means. Kimberly was born during Rod's marriage to Alana Stewart, at a time when his career was operating at full speed. She and her brother Sean belonged to a household surrounded by fame, travel, photographers, and a father whose professional life rarely stayed still for long. Decades later, Kimberly is the parent. Her eldest daughter, Delilah, is already a teenager. Then came her son, now another daughter is expected. And Rod. He gets to experience something he could not have understood when Kimberly herself was born. Grandchildren arrive without asking you to rebuild your entire life around them. You are not the exhausted young parent waking every few hours. You are not trying to understand how fatherhood fits beside ambition. You can simply arrive with more time, at least in theory. That distinction becomes particularly interesting with Rod, because he has been surprisingly open about not getting fatherhood right in every period of his life. His family did not emerge from one long marriage and one household. It was assembled across decades, different partners, different countries, and wildly different stages of maturity. There are 8 children, but treating them as one neat group misses almost everything. Kimberly grew up with one Rod. Sarah, his eldest daughter, had an entirely different experience. Renee and Liam knew another household. Alistair and Aidan grew up with Penny beside him and with a father already old enough to have adult children. That is not necessarily a tragedy. It is simply messy, and Rod's later years have become interesting precisely because the mess has not disappeared. The family seems to have learned how to live around it. Look at what has happened recently. Ruby has just welcomed another child. Kimberly announces another pregnancy. Rod's children increasingly appear together at weddings, birthdays, and family gatherings. The headline could easily become, "Rod Stewart's family keeps growing." True, but there is another way to read it. His family is no longer primarily something Rod Stewart created. It has become something that is continuing without his control. That can be a surprisingly profound transition for a man accustomed to controlling rooms. A concert begins when Rod walks out. A song changes when Rod decides. A career moves because Rod says yes to another date. Families do not work like that. Children grow up without permission. They choose partners, they become parents. Suddenly the man who once determined so much of the family's direction is waiting for someone else to tell him when the baby is due. And this particular announcement lands after doctors have already forced another lesson in control. Rod wanted to perform. His body required treatment. His doctors required rest. Then, while his own schedule temporarily became smaller, the family calendar gained another future date: a birth. There is something almost too neat about that contrast, which is exactly why I would be careful not to romanticize it. A new grandchild does not transform a coronary procedure into a blessing. Real families do not trade one worry for one joy and call the account balanced. Both simply exist at the same time: concern for an 81-year-old father, excitement for a baby who has not arrived yet. And perhaps that is what makes Kimberly's playful "oops, I did it again" more revealing than a dramatic family statement would have been. Nobody announced a grand lesson. Nobody needed to. The Stewart family had already spent several days looking at one end of life's uncertainty. Then Kimberly quietly pointed everyone toward the other. Rod Stewart has spent decades being described through excess. Too many relationships, too many headlines, too much energy, too much personality for one room. But there is another kind of excess around him now: family. And that changes how you read this latest news. 7 grandchildren is not simply a number. It means Rod is now living inside consequences that are far more permanent than any tour chart position or tabloid cycle. Children become adults. Adults become parents. And suddenly the stories people once treated as celebrity gossip produce another generation. That is where Kimberly's pregnancy becomes more interesting than it first appears. Because Kimberly is not just Rod Stewart's daughter. She is one of the people who lived through a period when his private life was constantly public property. Her parents' marriage ended when she was young. Her father continued moving through one of the most visible careers in music. Photographers followed relationships that, for the children involved, were not entertainment at all. There is a habit in celebrity storytelling to look backward and simplify those years. Rod was wild. Rod loved women. Rod eventually settled down. That version is easy to remember because it turns a complicated life into 3 sentences. But children do not experience their parents in 3 sentences. They remember who was there, who was late, who called, who forgot, who became easier to understand only years later. And perhaps that is one reason I find Rod's role as grandfather more revealing than the old stories about Rod the womanizer. A grandparent enters the family without quite the same power a parent once had. You cannot decide how your adult daughter raises her children. You do not control the household. You are invited into it. That is a different kind of relationship. For someone like Rod, who built a life around being the center of attention, becoming one figure among many inside an expanding family may be one of the more interesting transformations of his later years. Not dramatic, but real. Kimberly's eldest daughter, Delilah, has already grown up with Rod as her grandfather, rather than as the rock star the rest of the world sees. That distinction matters. To millions of people, Rod Stewart is a voice attached to memories. To a grandchild, he may simply be the older man at the table. The one who tells the same story twice, the one who arrives overdressed, the one everyone waits for in family photographs. Fame becomes strangely small inside a family. And maybe that is exactly why moments like this land differently at 81. Another grandchild does not add to Rod Stewart's legend. It adds to his ordinary life. There is something almost ironic about that. For decades, Rod chased permanence through music. Songs last, records remain. People still sing words written before many of his grandchildren were born. But family creates another kind of permanence, one he does not own. Kimberly's new daughter will grow up carrying a connection to Rod without having experienced the years that made him famous. She may know Maggie May because somebody plays it for her. She may see photographs of a grandfather with impossible hair standing in front of stadium crowds. But that will be history to her. Her Rod Stewart will be older, quieter perhaps. A man she knows through family before she understands what strangers once thought of him. And this is where the timing after his heart procedure becomes difficult to ignore. Again, not because the pregnancy is some symbolic answer to illness. That would be too convenient. But medical scares have a way of reorganizing family attention. People call more. They ask different questions. Future plans stop feeling automatic. You notice who is nearby. Then a baby is announced, and suddenly the word future stops being abstract. There will be another birthday, another name added to the family, another child who will one day hear stories about where she came from. And Rod is part of that story now in a role he could never have played during the years when his own children were being born. He is no longer building the next chapter himself. He is being written into theirs. I think that distinction is easy to miss. Celebrity culture trains us to ask whether Rod will return to the stage, when the next show happens, whether the tour resumes. Those questions make sense. But Kimberly's announcement quietly introduces another one. What if the most important places Rod Stewart needs to return to now are not stages at all? There is another detail worth noticing. Rod Stewart has always been surrounded by people, yet his later life seems to be becoming more intimate, not more public. That sounds contradictory for someone who spent decades in stadiums. But look at what now carries emotional weight. Not another chart position, not another award, a wedding, a grandchild, a family photograph, a daughter saying she is pregnant. These are small things by celebrity standards. They are enormous by ordinary ones. And perhaps Rod understands that more clearly now because his family no longer depends on him in the same way. His adult children have their own homes, partners, careers, and children. They do not need Rod Stewart the provider or Rod Stewart the famous father in the same way they once might have. What they can still need is simpler. His presence. That word keeps returning. Presence, not performance. There is an important difference. A performer can impress you for 2 hours. A father or grandfather is remembered through repetition, showing up again and again and again. Rod has not always been able to do that equally for everyone in his family. His own comments over the years make that clear enough. But later life offers a strange opportunity. You cannot rewrite the beginning, yet you can still influence what people remember about the ending. Kimberly's pregnancy arrives inside that window. Her new daughter will not know the younger Rod who dominated tabloids. She will meet the grandfather, the man already in his 80s, the one who has survived illnesses, marriages, career changes, public mistakes, and private adjustments. That is a very different inheritance. And there is something else I would not overlook. When health suddenly becomes uncertain, family news stops feeling routine. A future birth is no longer just another event on the calendar. It becomes a reason to imagine yourself still there, still present, still part of the photograph. No one has publicly said Rod reacted that way. We should not manufacture emotion for him. But the timing creates the question naturally. After several days in which people were discussing what his body had just been through, his daughter gave the family something else to talk about. Someone who has not even arrived yet. Maybe that is why this story feels warmer than the headline suggests. It is not simply unexpected family news. It is a reminder that, while Rod Stewart is recovering from one interruption, life around him has already started moving forward again. Perhaps the strangest thing about Rod Stewart's life now is that the future no longer looks like a tour schedule. For most of his career, the next thing was easy to identify. Another city, another stage, another album, another night under the lights. Momentum was almost the natural language of his life. Even when relationships changed, even when health interrupted things, even when the public assumed he might finally slow down, there was usually another date ahead, another reason to pack a suitcase, another crowd waiting somewhere. But Kimberly's announcement introduces a very different kind of future. A granddaughter who has not been born yet, a family gathering that has not happened, a photograph that does not exist yet. That may sound smaller than a concert. I'm not sure it is. Because when someone reaches 81, the future starts being measured differently, not only in years or professional plans, but in moments you hope to be present for. A birth, a first birthday, a Christmas morning, a child learning your name. That is where this story becomes more interesting than the obvious headline. The obvious version says Rod Stewart had heart surgery, then received happy family news. Simple. Almost too simple. But real families do not experience events in separate boxes. One concern bleeds into another conversation. One phone call changes the atmosphere. A doctor tells you to rest. Then a daughter announces that a baby is coming. Suddenly the future is no longer an abstract idea. It has a due date. And perhaps that is the part people overlook. Kimberly's new daughter will arrive into a family where Rod Stewart is no longer the central source of chaos, movement, or change. The children are creating the next generation now. Rod is watching it happen. That role reversal is subtle, but enormous. For decades, his life moved because of his choices. He chose tours, relationships, marriages, houses, careers, schedules. His decisions affected everyone around him. Now other people make the decisions that expand the family. A daughter becomes pregnant. A son gets married. Another child becomes a parent. Rod receives the news instead of creating it. There is humility in that position, whether he talks about it that way or not. You become part of somebody else's story, not the main character, just one person they hope will be there. And for a man who has spent most of his adult life being the person everyone else waited for, that is a meaningful change. There is also something almost disarming about imagining how Kimberly's daughter will eventually understand who her grandfather is. At first, probably not at all. Children do not care about record sales. They do not understand why strangers recognize a face. They do not know what it means to have a song become part of millions of lives. They know who picks them up, who makes them laugh, who arrives, who remembers their birthday, who smells familiar, who tells the same story more than once. That version of Rod Stewart is almost invisible to the public, and maybe that is why it matters. For much of his life, people looked at Rod and saw an image before they saw a person. The hair, the voice, the clothes, the reputation, the women, the stage. His grandchildren inherit none of that in quite the same way. They inherit him through proximity. Family reduces celebrity to something ordinary again. Grandpa. That word has no interest in mythology, and after a heart procedure, ordinary can suddenly feel valuable. There is a temptation with stories like this to turn the pregnancy into some kind of symbolic answer to Rod's health scare. That would be neat, too neat. A baby does not erase medical uncertainty. Good news does not cancel fear. Families can celebrate one thing while still worrying about another. That is probably closer to what makes this moment human. Rod can be recovering and excited at the same time. His family can be relieved and still cautious. Kimberly can make a playful announcement while the people around her remain aware that her father has just been told to slow down. Different emotions can occupy the same house. They usually do, and maybe this is where the phrase unexpected family news becomes more meaningful than it first appears. The surprise is not simply that Kimberly is pregnant. The surprise is the timing. Just when the public conversation around Rod had narrowed to his body, his recovery and what he could still physically do, his family expanded the story again. Suddenly there is someone new to meet, someone new to hold, someone new whose life stretches far beyond the questions being asked about Rod right now. That does not make him younger. It does something more interesting. It places him inside a future that is no longer defined entirely by his own endurance. There is another generation coming, whether he performs another 100 shows or none at all. That distinction matters. For decades, Rod Stewart's public value was tied to output. Could he still sing? Could he still tour? Could he still fill arenas? Could he still sound like himself? Those questions make sense when we are talking about the performer. But family asks something else. Can you be present? Not impressive, not energetic, not famous. Present. That is a different standard. And perhaps, at 81, a more important one. There may still be another tour. There may still be another triumphant return to the stage. Rod clearly has not presented this health interruption as a farewell, but even if the performances resume exactly as planned, Kimberly's announcement quietly changes the scale of the story. The next meaningful date in Rod Stewart's life may not be printed on a concert poster. It may be written on a hospital bracelet belonging to somebody else. A baby girl, another granddaughter, another person who will eventually grow up hearing stories about a grandfather she first knew simply as family. And maybe that is the perspective worth leaving with. Rod Stewart has spent a lifetime trying to remain unforgettable to millions of strangers. Now, after a week of medical concern, the future has handed him something much quieter. Another chance to be remembered closely, not by an audience, by someone who has not even arrived yet.